annual meetings also came with a small presentation to try and bring in new members and members of the public, and also give you a little bit of an extra reason besides companionship and updates on our finances to come and visit. The site and our volunteers have been doing a tremendous amount of research lately, updating the historic walking brochure of our neighborhood. The Magoffin Historic District was founded in 1961 by the city of El Paso, and in the last decade was added to the National Register of Historic Places, which means that we are a nationally significant neighborhood, which is pretty awesome. And in doing that research, we've really been digging into some of the buildings that were here and that lost, some of the residents, and learning a lot more about how they all interacted, particularly the people who owned this building, the Magoffins, and then their in-laws who lived just behind. So those three families are the Magoffins/Glasgows that most of us know and love at the Magoffin home, the Justices that lived in this building, and the Hings family that lived directly behind the Magoffin home, between the home and San Antonio Street. But let's get started with Dr. August Justice. He was born in 1841 back east and was a medical student, had not yet graduated or received any certifications as a medical professional when the Civil War broke out. He served under William Yandell Sr., Dr. Yandell Jr. is the one that the street is named for here in town, and who came and served as the county quarantine and health officers. But his father, under General Sidney Johnson, worked with Dr. Justice. And I expect that that might be part of the reason that Dr. Justice ended up in El Paso. As a young Civil War surgeon upgraded beyond his means, he had an exciting time in the war. He was shot twice. Once in his left chest and lung, and another time in his hip. He was known to do battlefield operations and care for soldiers, so he was somebody who was out there in the thick of it. He was also captured and held at a prisoner of war camp in Chicago, Illinois, sometime around 1862 or so. And so these are images of Camp Douglas, which is likely the camp he was interred at. I don't know for sure, but that's the major camp up in that area. And there's images from Harper's Bazaar, but there's also an actual photograph that was taken. And I've got a little description here of the camp and what Dr. Justice endured. So the president of the U.S. Sanitary Commission visited, and he said, "Sir," in a letter to the president, "the amount of standing water unpoliced on grounds, of foul stinks, of unventilated and crowded barracks, of general disorder, of soiled, reeking, miasmic accretions, of rotted bones and emptying camp kettles, is enough to drive a sanitarian to despair. The absolute abandonment of the spot seems to be the only judicious course. I do not believe that any amount of drainage would purge the soil of the filth. Nothing but fire can cleanse this area." The camp remained in operation throughout the end of the Civil War, at which time Dr. Justice was freed, and came to El Paso. He came here in 1881 and established a successful medical practice. This is the town he came to, a vision of El Paso Street in 1881. Yeah, it's a bit different than today. He was a surgeon who served all members of the public, especially the inhabitants of El Paso's reservation, which is our red light district. So that was in existence from around 1881 until 1944, and was located a couple of blocks downtown. And Dr. Justice, if you read the newspaper articles, they talk about, oh, well, this madam and that person had an altercation, and one of them shot each other, and Dr. Justice was there, or one of the ladies had a problem, she got stabbed, Dr. Justice was there. I think that he was so cool, calm, and collected from his time on the battlefield front that nothing in the reservation could scare him. And in fact, there is a famous among historians, debacle where two of the madams who had rival houses across the street from each other came out into the road and shot at each other. one of the young ladies from one of the establishments had fled into the arms of the rival madam, and they were not going to have it. And so one of the ladies shot the other in a very delicate area, the pubic arch, which is very important to her career and livelihood. Dr. Justice was called that night and performed a repair, and she was able to go on and continue her profession and her activities. So he must have done a pretty good job. Unfortunately, for the Madam Note, the story made the newspapers, and the title headline there was a typo. Back in those days, type was put in letter by letter and also backwards mirror image, so kind of hard to check. And they called it the public arch, which the people of El Paso found hilarious, given her. But he performed that repair. Also around 1891, a little bit after that, he met this beautiful woman, Miss Estelle Louise Levesque, who is from New Orleans. And here is something that we recently discovered. This is their wedding. This is the certificate of their marriage, the actual one. So you see up there, it's February 18th, just after Valentine's Day. We've got William Justice as his father, so we've learned a little bit about him. And her name, Miss Marie Louise Estelle Vec, the daughter of Charles Vec. And we wanted to know a little bit more about her, since now we know her name. So in looking at the censuses of the United States, here's the 1870 census, and we're able to find Miss Estelle and her family. So here is Charles Beck, the father. We believe that the mother passed away before the census was made, or else was not home. There's a son, Charles, Eliza, a daughter who keeps house, and then way down here at the bottom is Estella. There's also her older daughter, Sidonia, which we're going to talk about in a minute, so remember her. You might also notice some interesting things about this spreadsheet if you're a census watcher. One of the notes is that, and let's look at this here. This is a section on the censuses. It's very common to record the racial characteristics of people in the town. And so here we've got Estelle, for example, age 3 years old, F for female, and M for mulatto, which means that she was a biracial person with parents who were black and white, perhaps. Looking at her parents' ancestry, her father came from Spain and her mother came from France. Her father, as we see in a couple of different years, is listed as a painter or a clerk. They had a store, often in very different places. None of the directories have them in the same location year to year. And this is her father's death certificate in 1884. Yes, so just before she got married, about 5 years before. And in this certificate, he's listed as a white person, which is interesting. We have the images of Dr. Justice and his wife up on the wall, donated by their descendants. And I think that the family must have been white passing, but it's something we did not know. The family moved to this home in 1902. Dr. Justice actually had the plans for this building drawn up about 7 years earlier, but they didn't build it and move in until 1902. And that is a photo of their son, CJ, out front with his car. Dr. Justice, like Mayor Magoffin, hated automobiles. He was firmly in the horse and buggy crowd and would not transport himself in any other fashion. So we know that the vehicle was not his. We've had a delightful number of volunteers who've been able to help with this research. Joseph has done a lot of help for me. He's got a newspapers.com account, which I really appreciate. I'm always plaguing him. Can you send me this? Can you give me this? Do you see this? But also our friend who used to be the curator at the History Museum, Barbara Angus, has been sending some really cool maps. And so this is one of them sort of showing the whole city. It's undated, but I think it's about the 1880s. And so here's us right there next to our acequia. And we're going to zoom in a little bit in just a second. We're looking at a 1888 article talking about bandits coming in south of the home and coming near Magoffin and then coming up this way, sort of coming between these three properties, which I find interesting. So here, let's outline where we're talking about. That red arrow is where we are right now. You see the Magoffin home just south of that, with the acequia, the Magoffin acequia coming behind that. And then just back there is the home of Sam Hing, who was in that newspaper article. Here's another way to look at it. This is a plat of this specific neighborhood as they planned to build it. And you can see we've got where we are all sitting at this exact moment, followed by the address of Sam Hing. And I'd like to show you that property. Oh, wow. That is a stunning house that speaks of significant wealth. And in our research, I was even able to find, Nancy Farr has a book on the Chinese in El Paso. And from that book, this is supposed to be a photograph of that house as well. Sam Hing was a gentleman who was born in China and moved here, according to his own accounts, around the age of 17, speaking no language other than the Chinese tongue that he started with. He came with his brother, and in an old account he mentions that his brother had never learned any more English, but that he'd learned English and Spanish and others besides. And he worked with the railroads. And he worked specifically for this gentleman whose name I was sure I was going to remember, but I did not write down in my notes, so you'll forgive me. But he was the contractor that Sam Hing worked for, and he helped to arrange the Chinese contractors who worked on the number of railroads that came to El Paso. So we had 5 major railroads come join here following 1881, right when Mr. Hing showed up. And he was able to translate, he was able to organize the work crews, and he was able to get a cut of their pay for each and every one of those people. So here we have an image of work crews, Chinese work crews in New Mexico, and then another here from California. I believe that there must be images like this from this area, but I don't know that they're as digitized or as available. Once Mr. Hing got his some wealth through that way, he also opened a business in town. He opened a cabinetry and woodworking business. We have no images of his original store, but we know the building that replaced it, the Crest building downtown. So right off the square, right near where the current marker is for El Paso's Chinese community. And I'm talking so much about Dr. King because he was actually a brother-in-law of Dr. Justice. His wife was wife of Miss Estelle. Here we have the marriage registry from that same registry earlier. And you see we have Mr. Sam Hing from China, the son of James Hing, which is interesting. I'd love to find him, haven't yet. And Miss Louise Sidonia Beck. They were 3 sisters of that family, all of whom married interesting people. And this was such a remarkable thing at the time. It was widely covered in newspapers. So here we have the New York Times remarking on this event, stating that it was, yes, not perhaps the terminology we would use today. I'm finding that one of the biggest challenges in doing some of this research is knowing what terms to look up because they don't come naturally to a modern person. But we get a lot of information from these newspaper articles. So the young lady has an unblemished reputation. She's beautiful and accomplished. It was in the parlor of her family's home. And he, still dressed with his hair in the long plait down his back and on top of his head, which is interesting in comparison to some of the other Chinese El Paso residents. We know that there were a number of people who chose to cut off their traditional hair queue, partially to have ease of access across the border following the Chinese Exclusion Act. We have another article here that is more of a reminiscence from somebody who was here at the time. And it goes into great details, but my favorite part is that the person who was giving this talk talks about how when they returned, Hing gave $100 to celebrate the fireworks of the 4th of July, that they arrived in time for the 4th of July, and that it was the first 4th of July celebration that had really happened in El Paso. The person who's remembering this says that the natives, the local El Pasoans, never would have occurred to them to celebrate that way. And that later he and his bride left to Mexico to make other fortunes. And just for reference, here's an image of fireworks from that same year. It's not here, this is the Brooklyn Bridge, but you know, fireworks displays in the ways that we think of did happen. And I grew up in Chaparral, where, you know, at the 4th of July, everyone would go to the state line and set off the fireworks, and we'd spend every 4th of July terrified that our house was going to burn down. And I imagine that there was some of that similar sensation here in this neighborhood. As the family continued to grow, we get this wonderful report from the El Paso Herald that Dr. McKinney, and I do wonder, why not Dr. Justice? Did he not want to see his sister-in-law in that state? Was it inappropriate? Was Dr. McKinney a better obstetrician? One wonders, but we'll keep to research. But that they had the first Chino-Americano child born in the state of Texas. And at the end, congratulate him upon perpetuating the Hing dynasty in the Empire of Texas. Oh, this is the same newspaper that a few years prior had called El Paso the Chinese Mecca of the world. So they were pretty well sold. Joseph has been helping me do some research. We're trying to find these children, what happened to his family after this moment. And there is a suspicion that we believe that this child's name was Enrique Hing, and that eventually his line might have anglicized their name Hing into King, because there's a large number of kings who are looking at their ancestry with this family. We've reached out, haven't heard anything, looking to know more. Continuing with Mr. Hing's activities in this neighborhood, this is a map from 1883, the Fire Sanborn maps. And the Magoffin home is hidden underneath this annoying little inset of other houses in the neighborhood. It really upsets me. And also, so is Sam Hing's house, but it should be there. That's right about where it would be. But you can also see, if you look up and down San Antonio Street, and here, let me help you see it a little better, Chine, C-H-I-N-E, vegetable gardens. And in looking at newspaper accounts and also maps like this, there were Chinese gardens littered up and down San Antonio Street and Myrtle as well, leading to downtown. And it looks like they planted on both sides of the road, very close to that acequia, so it would have had access to water. And then there was a whole legion of what's called truck farmers, Chinese people who grew small vegetable patches right here in the neighborhood, gathered that produce and then took them to a sales point, someplace like the city market, which is now where the R.E. Thomason Federal Courthouse is. But for many, 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 many years, that was a place where Chinese foods would be sold. There was a Jewish delicatessen, there was a German bakery, you name it, that place had it. There was even a fish store, which I don't really understand. And continuing our search for Mr. Hing, this is the last sort of newspaper article I can find about him. It's sort of somebody tracked him down in Mexico and was asking him about his life. So he talks about coming at 17, about his brother failed to invest in the language. But he also talks about his work and his philosophy, that he doesn't want to rest, that he feels that constantly working and constantly striving is one of his important things, and that he has his children to look for, that he has his boys. And how many boys, the newspaper person asks? 3 and a girl. And Mrs. Hing, Mrs. Sam Hing, a Spanish lady. We know that the family moved to Mexico. We don't entirely know why. There's a number of academic articles that suggest that perhaps being a union of 2 very different places and cultures might have been fine for the Hing family, but that the community might not have been as accepting, so that, especially at the time of the Chinese Exclusion Act and some of those continued difficulties, that they moved to a country that was more accommodating And in fact, we do find Hings in Juarez in the 1940 census in Mexico, but they're not the same age. So we've still got some work to do. This is a map of the railroads in Mexico just after the 1890s and the early 1900s, the kind of work that Mr. Hing might have continued. And that is the conclusion of this set of research, the recent things that we've learned. Thank you for joining me for it. Any questions, anything you'd like to know?
Regarding the home, do you know anything about that? The Sam Hing's house?
Yes.
Was it torn down? What happened to it? It was so big.
It was torn down. I do not know exactly when. That is something I would like to determine for sure. I know that many of the buildings in our historical brochure were torn down as part of eminent domain in the late 1950s, early 1960s to build Sun Plaza. And so today, if you go to Sun Plaza, their parking lot, their front parking lot is where the Hing home would have stood.
So is there any record of who lived in the house after the Hings left?
I do not. I have not been able to find it, but I'm sure that there is. That'll be the next update. If you guys give me a year, we'll be able to research down. Yeah.
Is that place where is the laundry right now?
Yes, so there is the laundry building down in Duranguito, which is the last surviving structure that was a Chinese laundry. And since they've taken down some of the fences, has anyone been to see it lately? My understanding is you can see it much more easily now than before.
But that house was in San Antonio Street?
Yes,
Where
yes.
is right now is the laundry.
Oh, the St. Vincent Laundries.
Sorry,
Yes.
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 That's the place.
I believe that Miss Howard, our brothel madam, was at the the laundromat today, and that Mr. Hing was on your side of the street, between where your apartment is and the parking lot.
Oh.
Yes, ma'am.
In the parking lot of my apartment building?
Yes, ma'am.
That house?
Here, one sec. I have an explanatory image.
I thought it was in front
No, I
of
don't.
us.
Right here. So here we have San Antonio Street with the streetcar coming along, and there was one little block right here of houses that were sold off. And actually, my PowerPoint didn't update. I've got a picture of the bill of sale. Magoffin sold 5 parcels of land on this block to him directly. So wasn't that kind of racist?
Okay, it's on the side of my building.
Yes, ma'am.
Apartment
Yes,
building.
ma'am.
Okay.
I used to live on Magoffin Street,
Yes.
and in the 60s, they threw a lot of Victorian homes. I lived lots of them, and my best friend lived here.
In this house.
Yes.
In this house.
Yes,
Wow.
but there were apartments, it was on each side, so they lived on this side. I wonder if you know, the mother lived, so she had a bed. And then there, they had 2 twin beds, and then another wall, and then right there where you're standing was a little kitchen, and right in this corner was the bathroom.
Wow.
And then we played around the neighborhood, because I went to San Jacinto,
Mm-hmm.
and Tia invited us one time inside the home,
Mm-hmm.
just to the foyer. And she had the piano right there in one of the corners next to the door. She gave us a piece of candy. And she played piano with us.
Oh.
And we just met her one time. But nobody ever bothered her.
Mm-hmm.
We respected her property.
Yes.
But it was fun.
Yeah.
Wow. Another thing, I remember reading in the tours that Josephine's bedroom set was delivered to El Paso from New Orleans for the cotton exhibition to the Sam Hing establishment. Do you know
Yes.
anything more about that?
Yes, and so we found through Joseph's research up in our files a file that has a photo of a label that's got like sort of the quarter New Orleans and Sam Hing on it, and it looks very much as if it's on the back of the bed. So we have to do this project where we're going to be restoring the house, we're gonna have to move the furniture.
And
I'm
the box
really
bed.
looking forward to moving the bed out and seeing if we can find that label affixed, which would confirm that story completely. The giant,
Josephine's, yes.
go ahead, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but interesting how people interacted so closely together and kind of unusual to live so close to your sister. Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.